Yeah, hey guys. So today I kind of wanted to cover enabling initial load. So we're going to start pushing records into MDM. So for this case, we're going to enable initial load for our NetSuite source, set up the integration process to reflect this, and we'll kind of show what happens during this process. So first things first, let's go to our repository and let's go to our employee model. So what's attached to our employee model is our NetSuite source. As you can see, it can contribute and accept. Initial load only occurs for sources that can contribute. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the gear tab. I'm going to enable initial load. Allow this to finish. Notice how it's in this blue state. Once initial load is completed, typically this goes into a green state. So just a little more about initial load. Let's say for this arbitrary example, as we've talked about, that we're using NetSuite as our source. The records don't have to come from NetSuite. I'm just making a simple proof of concept with one record as our initial load in theory. So essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to create that one record. I'm going to update it and finish my initial load. Typically, you're going to pass all of the records you have during initial load. But as I mentioned, just for the simple proof of concept, I'm just going to use one record. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to essentially set up my process to allow for records to be flow through. So what's going to happen is essentially you're going to send your record and it's going to propagate through the match rules. It's going to propagate through any sort of data quality steps you set up when applicable and any items such as that. And then, as I mentioned, you finish it and this is an active and working source. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to validate essentially the structure of my model. So there's an ID field that's required. So the reason this ID field is so important is essentially it links that external source to a golden record. So what's going to happen is this ID is the linkage between the external source ID and the golden record ID. And that's kind of that link between the NetSuite and like MDH repository. So I have an ID field, I have a social security number, I have a first name, and I have a last name. So what I'm going to do is just for this proof of concept, I'm going to take a message. I'm going to make ID 1. I'll use my social security number. Great. And then I'm going to type my name. Great. So that's my structure of my incoming data. But as we mentioned, you have an MDM connector operation here with this upsert request. So you're going to have to map your source data to data that MDM expects to see. So I'm going to pull a map. I'm going to create a map. So I have to define a flat file for this. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a brand new flat file with 4 elements. So ID, social, F name, and L name. So save that, go to options. It's not going to be star delimitered, it'll be comma delimitered. So that should all be good to go. Great. So we have our flat file profile set up. And now I'm going to have to use my MDM upsert request. So as I mentioned, you always need an ID field. So here's your ID field. Here's your social. Here's your first name. And here's your last name. Great. So that looks all to be set up. Let's put these together. And let's run a test process. Great. And let's use So the test execution was completed successfully. And as I mentioned during initial load, it'll go through all those channels, those validations, and then determine this record to be proper or not. So let's see what happened to our record repository. Let's just refresh it. So it's still in our initial load. And let's see our golden records. Was anything created? It was not created. So let's check quarantine. Great. So it got quarantined. This is what I wanted to see. So it went through the expected fields. And then, as it says, the record social security number has more characters than the maximum allowed of 11. So it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it has 12 characters, got quarantined. That's what I expected to happen. So now, what if I run this with a valid social? This should work as expected because it matches that character set that I defined. So now what you'll see is this record will still be in the quarantine. We'll talk about how to address that after, but think of this now as the golden record, and this is essentially the true record, that true source. So we see from fields, you can see everything that's created from it. The source, so as you can see, NetSuite established it as a valid record with an entity ID of 1 because we passed 1, no tags, and no history as of yet. So that's going to be it for today. And we'll kind of talk about tomorrow what happened with that quarantined record and kind of how to address records from a quarantine for this specific use case. But before we do that, let's just disable our initial load. So we're going to finish it. And now we have a valid source. As you can see, it's green. All right, sounds good, guys. Have a nice rest of your day.